Hello and welcome to Geektopia with me, Adam Carruthers, a space on the internet, on YouTube, where I can talk about anything geeky. Comic books, TV shows, video games, movies, toys, absolutely anything with you, my friend. And I have little segments within Geektopia to sort of like separate everything. This is Adam's Apples, where I can talk about lists. I can create as many lists as I want. And today's one is a continuation of what I tried to finish before, my top 5 80s cartoons. I got through 3, and I realized this was so hard for me to do. So this is part 2. We ready?
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Let's go. So I've mentioned He-Man, I've mentioned the Turtles, I've mentioned Ghostbusters. How can I not mention the Transformers? 1984. It was the year of the Transformers. We got the animation, which ran for 4 seasons. We got the comic books published by Marvel, plus we got the toys as well. But it has a slightly older history. Of course, we know Hasbro were involved. They had huge success with their G.I. Joe toys. They revitalized that. It actually begins with Japanese toys. Microman and Diaclone, the Japanese toy makers from earlier. Hasbro got involved, so, I mean, Diaclone were the ones who had the vehicles that could transform into robots, and Microman had, like, the figures, humanoid figures, and other accessories as well. Put them all together, and that's how you get the Transformers. So what I think of when I say Transformers, oddly enough, the first thing that pops to my mind is Peter Cullen. Might not be familiar to you. Maybe you'll recognize his voice from Winnie the Pooh, where he played Eeyore.
It's okay.
But for me, he'll always be Optimus Prime. So tired of the role, when they made the live-action movies decades later, who did they get to come back and voice Optimus Prime? You got it. A much older, but still awesome Peter Cullen. In fact, I found it interesting when he went for his audition, he based it off his brother, who was a captain in the United States Marine Corps, and even gave him some advice. He said, don't be a Hollywood superhero, be a real superhero. Real superheroes don't yell and act tough. They are tough enough to be gentle, so control yourself. By the way, he also voiced Ironhide. I mean, that guy is Mr. Transformers. Am I right?
It's been an honor serving with you all. Autobots, roll out! We roll!
What else about Transformers springs to mind? How about the movie, which came out in 1986? At this point, Transformers was huge. The voice cast for the movie, they got the original actors, of course, but they also got Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock from Star Trek, Orson Welles, one of the most celebrated filmmakers of all time in his last role. Casey Kasem, a very famous radio announcer, also one of the voices for Robin from Batman and Robin, also the voice of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. I mean, these were big names to be doing an animated film, not like what it is nowadays, but it was also controversial because they killed off Optimus Prime in the opening act of the movie. And there was public outrage about this because kids were upset. I mean, I was 1 at the time, but from what I read, kids were leaving the cinema in tears. Peter Cullen, who didn't know how popular Optimus Prime was at this point because the studio never gave him fan mail, only then, with the death of Optimus Prime, did he realize how big a character he was. And of course, Optimus Prime was brought back later on in the TV show because of the outrage. But it spun off into the G.I. Joe movie, where Duke was supposed to die. But because people were so upset about Optimus Prime, they opted to keep Duke alive, and I think that was a very smart decision. But that movie, who can forget the theme song to it? One of the songs. You got the touch! You got the power! 80s rock at its best.
You got the power!
The legacy of Transformers is still going strong today, though. There's no doubting that. The original series wrapped up in 1987, but it kind of continued, but exclusively to Japan. There was also a whole bunch of different versions. Beast Wars, Transformers Armada, Transformers Animated, Transformers Rescue Bot, Transformers Prime. Honestly, there's too many to mention. On top of all of the toys, the live-action movies of Michael Bay, the latest being Bumblebee as well, which harked back to the original designs, all different generations of Transformers, because Generation 1 was the original one. Do you get it? Yeah. But if you're still into your Transformers, I highly recommend you check out what's on Netflix right now, the War for Cybertron trilogy. It's got the original sort of character designs. It's really well done, very well scripted, well animated, CGI, but yeah, well worth a visit. War for Cybertron trilogy. So the final entry on my list, another 80s cartoon with an awesome theme song. DuckTales. Woohoo! DuckTales. According to the composer, Mr. Mark Mueller, he was only paid $1,250 USD for that. A song which I remember decades later, but I guess he wasn't too upset, though I think it's shambolic, because he came back to write the theme song for Chippendale Rescue Rangers. I mean, the guy that's got pedigree. He's done a lot of pop stuff, including Jennifer Page's Crush, which came out, well, a while ago now, but still also catchy. As for the show, it ran for 4 seasons, gave us 100 episodes, all about Uncle Scrooge and his grandnephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, who themselves are also the nephews of Donald Duck. What about the plots and storylines? Did it differ from the comic? Let me list out a few things. For one, Uncle Scrooge was meaner in the comics. Donald Duck was in the comics as well, but the creators felt that having Donald Duck in the show would take away attention from all of the other characters because Donald is already a huge star, and they were probably right. It allowed Huey, Dewey, and Louie to shine. It allowed the creation of Launchpad, which was his first ever appearance, and it allowed Uncle Scrooge to become the star that we know him as now. Another interesting thing I found was at the time they were creating DuckTales as an animation, they were also playing around with the idea of an Indiana Jones TV show. This is Disney, by the way. And they did have an Indiana Jones TV show in the future, but looking at the comics, they realized, oh, yeah, this is already a bit like Indiana Jones, so they combined everything and made DuckTales. In fact, the composer of DuckTales said he was inspired by the Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark movie from 1981 as well. So, there you go. Interesting, right? Because I love Indiana Jones as well. Ooh, also, the main villains differed from the comics because originally they were all, like, identical. No individual personalities, but in the TV show, they had their own personalities and they all looked at least a little bit different. I love the Beagle Boys. Also, we owe a debt of gratitude to DuckTales because of how it was treated. Firstly, it was given a rather large investment. If you compare the animation from DuckTales to other animations at the time or earlier, you could see the production value was much higher. That was a risk. But also, Disney, the studio, decided to bank on this being their very first weekly syndicated TV show, animated show. And that was also a gamble, but it paid off in spades. And because of the success, it gave us the Chippendale Rescue Rangers, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, the list goes on, and it all started here with DuckTales. What about the legacy of DuckTales? We kind of got a spin-off in Tailspin. I mean, look at the name, Tailspin, T-A-L-E-S, DuckTales, T-A-L-E-S as well. Okay. Launchpad the Quack was in both shows and also in Darkwing Duck. Tailspin and Darkwing Duck, both weekly syndicated shows, of which DuckTales was the first to do so, which was a risk, like I mentioned earlier on. That's why it's left a lasting legacy beyond just the characters. And I have to talk about the video game, the original one, which came out for the NES and then ported for the Game Boy. It had its own spin-offs, but the original game, I had a lot of fun playing that. And it got remastered not too long ago for the PS3 generation of consoles, and it was even made available on mobile devices on iOS and Android. Such a good game. If you're still craving more DuckTales in your life, I got some good news. You might not be aware, but in 2017 they rebooted DuckTales, and dare I say it, might even be better than the original TV show. It's won a whole host of awards. Here we are in 2021 and it is still going strong. So if you have some time, go and check it out, because it really is worth the effort. Trust me. And that wraps up part 2 of my top 5 animated shows from the 80s, but there were so many more I wanted to mention. So just to give a little shout out to the following: the Care Bears, Thundercats, Thunder, ho! Inspector Gadget, the Gummy Bears, Count Duckula, Chippendale Rescue Rangers, the Smurfs, Mask or MESK, Voltron, G.I. Joe. And I gotta talk a little bit more about 3 additional ones. Doraemon, the reason it's not on this list is because it started in 1979, not the 80s. Ultraman didn't really have much going on in the 80s. Almost nothing, as a matter of fact. There was just the one show which aired from 1980 to 1981 called Ultraman 80, and it wasn't that great. There are far better versions of Ultraman in other decades. But I also have to mention The Simpsons. Technically, it started in 1987 as a series of short little segments on the Tracy Ullman Show, but their own show only aired in late 1989, December 17th. So the 80s only had a few episodes of The Simpsons, if that. They only became popular in the 90s. Kinda goes against what I said about Doraemon early on, but I don't care. But you know what? On the topic of 90s cartoons, since I mentioned The Simpsons, maybe my next list should be my favorite 90s animations. What do you think about that? Make sure you leave a comment on your favorite 90s cartoons or 80s cartoons, or what you think about my list. Is it a travesty or not? Like, share, and subscribe to Geektopia. This is Adam, signing out.